think we'll get started. I'm Rich Paxton. I'm a pediatrician with View Medical Group, and grew up in Salt Lake. Spent 11 quality years at the University of Utah, and then moved to Spanish Fork. And we've been here for over 16 years now, and just absolutely loved it. This is my wife and one of our sons, and I'm happy to be able to talk to you a little bit about nutrition. And it's a big topic, but we hope to just present some nice ideas that you might be able to work on today.
Awesome. Okay, great. I'm Lisie Byington. Also, I'm from Spanish Fork, and this is my husband Taylor here. And I studied, just to give a little background, I studied exercise and wellness at BYU with emphasis in nutrition and chronic disease prevention. And now I'm working at the pediatric clinic in Spanish Fork, where we started a family wellness program that focuses on healthy weight management and kind of working with picky eaters and other behavioral things related to nutrition and exercise. So I'm really glad to be here with you, and I feel really grateful to work with and learn from Dr. Paxton. He really knows his stuff. So anyways, we wanted to just kind of start, as you may know, our topic today is discussing dieting versus real nutrition. And so we wanted to start by just talking about the word diet and what it means. So the dictionary definition for diet says the kinds of food that a person, animal, or community habitually eats. So that's what the dictionary tells us diet is. But it seems like it's kind of evolved, and whenever we talk about diet, we seem to be more talking about going on a diet. And so we kind of thought that definition kind of fits more along the line of food choices and maybe restrictions that a person makes for a period of time in order to manipulate weight loss. So today when we're talking about dieting, that's really what we're referring to, is the act of restricting something in order to manipulate weight loss. And our hope is that we can maybe provide an alternative to that is research-based and maybe a little more effective. So we'll start by sharing a little video clip. It's kind of, I'm a little click happy. I think
No,
it's right here. Oh dear. There we go.
Hopefully you can hear it.
You look so thin. Do I? Oh, it's for Paris. Well, I'm on this new diet. It's very effective. Well, I don't eat anything. And when I feel like I'm about to faint, I eat a cube of cheese. Well, it's definitely working. I know, I'm just one stomach flu away from the goal weight.
So that illustrates a lot of the things that that can be really concerning about fad diets. She said her diet was, well, I don't eat anything, and then when I'm about to faint, I eat a cube of cheese. And so if a lot of the fad diets, that one is a silly example, but there are many out there that don't make a lot more sense than that, and yet they can be kind of appealing. And so kind of a silly example, but we wanted to talk a little bit about how we got here. So historically, diet was really geographically determined. You just basically ate what was around in your area. Only in the last 100 to 150 years have people been able to really determine what they eat from a wide variety of choices. It used to be that anyone who had abundant food had to be wealthy, and everybody else was fairly limited. Advances in food production, safety, transportation, and then the advent of refrigeration allowed for food to be much more available to everyone. And so now that's the case, that especially in this country, it's rare to find, we talk about food insecurity, and that does exist, but before the last 100 years, people would routinely starve to death just because of lack of availability of food, but that no longer occurs. And quite the opposite is the case now, where pretty much everyone has access to quite a bit of food. And and high calories. And then also, over the last 100 years especially, there's been a huge decrease in the amount of physical labor that's required for most work and most professions.
Great. So we just kind of wanted to give you maybe a visual of what he's talking about, something that's really applicable. We have some data that we're going to show you that's basically a series of slides that takes us through like from 1985 to about 2010, and then we'll kind of fill in the gap with some data that leads up to now. And the reason that we wanted to show this is going to show obesity rates by state. Oh yeah, pause that really fast, thank you. This is going to show obesity rates by state. And so I just want to kind of give you a little bit of context here. So down here, oh, how do I get this to go away?
I can get the screen.
Oh, perfect. Voila. Okay, so down here in these little boxes, I don't know how well you can see that, but this is showing data for each color represents a certain percentage. So for example, this light blue one is showing that under 10% of the light blue states is obese. And then the darker blue is showing that between 10 to 14% of these states are obese. And so when we're talking about obesity or how we classify that, it's based on BMI, our body mass index. And that's kind of a score that's given based on a person's height and weight to determine on average if they're at a healthy weight for their height. And so to give you like a little bit of context, above a BMI score between 25 and 30 would be classified as being overweight. A BMI above 30 is classified as being obese. And so this data is showing only obesity. So this starts in 1985. We'll just kind of go through and watch what happens over the years. So you can see that a lot more states are bumping up to having more percentage and increased percentage. 1991, a new category is included because now all these dark blue states have 15 to 19% of their population is obese. Okay, so 1997, we start to see states that have almost a quarter of their population is obese. Okay, so yeah, we're seeing that again now these states that are orange have over a quarter of their population, almost 30%, and now over 30%. Utah, as you can see, popped up here to being about a quarter of our state is obese, and that's back in 2008. Okay, so by 2010 already we saw these crazy, like really significant changes in our obesity rates in the United States. And this is 2010, so we're now 2019, which I'm still trying to get used to. But today we know that we have about, the rates now, approximately, about 2 in every 3 adults in the United States is overweight or obese. And about 1 of those 2 is obese. So obviously, these are pretty significant changes. And I think for me, the first time that I saw this, what really hit me was, I think it just really hit me for the first time, the seriousness of this, and that the reality of the situation, which people are calling the obesity epidemic. And we're really, all of us, living right through that and experiencing that. And so I think our first reason for kind of showing that is to raise that awareness and help us to just kind of recognize that. But I think second, it kind of helps to have a little bit of maybe validation. Oh, wow, that was great. But it kind of helps to have some validation. If you've ever felt that, you're fighting an uphill battle when it comes to your weight or your health, I think this, seeing that happen and seeing you're not alone. And, when we first brought up the topic of diet, we talked about it being a pattern of food intake that is influenced, for yourself, for your family, or for your culture. Well, looking at our culture, this is not really necessarily the easiest environment for us to be making healthy choices. And so I think what's kind of come from that is it leaves a lot of people feeling this sense of desperation. And we're desperate for solutions. We're trying to find answers and trying to get our way out of what maybe feels like a hole, when you look at that data. And I think that a lot of time is where the dieting industry can pry on us, because they know that we feel that like there's just so much money that can be made from people who are desperate. And so we just wanted to say, before we even get into any diet or talk about anything, that if you've ever been on a diet or many diets or you're on one right now, there is absolutely no shame in that. We recognize that there's good intention and that we're all trying to solve what has become a huge problem. So,
just some concerns about dieting in general, not only fad diets, but just the idea of dieting, the verb. So typically they're not sustainable. So if you do anything or see anything that says, okay, do this for 30 days, well, that might make a short-term difference, but this is really we're looking at the long game here. And it's really hard to make a good case for a change that you make over 3 weeks. That's not going to make a lasting change for you, especially for your health. Also, most diets, especially the fad ones, are quite food restrictive, meaning that you can only eat this, you can't eat this. And that in itself is fairly difficult to pull off, and it's also difficult to be consistent with. Calorie restriction is a real problem too, because even if you temporarily restrict calories, most of the way you lose, because you can't lose weight just by simple calorie restriction, but most of that weight loss is water weight and muscle weight. And then when you go back to eating your typical diet, you're going to tend to gain more weight because your metabolic rate is now less. You've lost muscle, you've lost part of the engine of your body, and it's really detrimental. So that's why we see the yo-yo effect so often with dieting. And many of them lack certain macronutrients that can be quite problematic in the long term. So if you do manage to stay on a fairly restrictive diet for a long time, you may find that you are actually lacking in several nutrients over the months and years. And we have to keep in mind, a lot of this is commercially driven. And I often think about the fact that real nutrition and just healthy lifestyles, a lot of the ideas are fairly simple. We tend to know them. They don't sell books. They don't get you on talk shows. And so it kind of goes extreme. And a lot of the people who create these diets, they just have one goal in mind. They really want to get your business. And so we have to be aware of that as well. So if we shouldn't go on a diet, if dieting is not what we should do, what should we do? So we'll talk about some guidelines and recommendations, some research, and some behavioral ideas, because so much of our eating is really behavioral. Notice I said some. This is a huge topic. We're only going to hit a few things. We could hit a lot of others as well. There's just not time. But we'll talk about a few ideas that will hopefully get us going in the right direction.
10 principles that Dr. Paxton and I together felt like were some of the principles that were most likely to help you to see success that are sound and research-based, just like he talked about. So the first one that we wanted to mention is minimizing intake of sugar-sweetened beverages. And I know that many of you have probably heard this said again and again. And one of the main reasons that we want to minimize our intake of sugar-sweetened beverages is the effect that it has on our health. We know that it causes a really extreme insulin response compared to other foods that's hard for our body to manage. It's can be kind of a predictor of chronic diseases like diabetes, obesity. And so that's really important. One thing that we wanted to really specifically talk about today is the effect that sugar-sweetened beverages can have on our weight. So the thing about sugar-sweetened beverages, and compared to eating maybe a snack or even a dessert, is that when we drink calories or we drink sugar like we do when we drink soda pop, fruit punch, lemonade, alcoholic beverages, things like that, is that we don't compensate for it in the same way that we compensate for the added calories of food. And so when we eat a snack or even when we eat a treat, our body is able to tell us, okay, I'm hungry, I'm over hungry, or I'm full. Sorry, excuse me. I'm full, I feel satiated, or it can even help us naturally. It's really amazing to eat a little bit less later to compensate and things like that. But when we drink, it does not have the same effect. So, do you know why that's doing? Okay. So this is a quote that I liked. It says, "Fluid calories do not hold strong satiety properties, don't suppress hunger, and don't elicit compensatory dietary responses. When drinking fluid calories, people often end up eating more calories overall." And so that's really a big concern as far as weight loss goes, is that we're getting all this additional energy that our body isn't really accounting for. And the result of that is often really frustrating. It's, if someone was eating the correct amount of calories for their body's weight and height to maintain their weight, and they added just a 12-ounce serving of a sugar-sweetened beverage, on average, just from that alone, over a year's period, that would account for 15 added pounds. And so it's kind of interesting to take that into account. One thing that we get a lot of questions about is juice and how that fits into this. Juice would be considered a sugar-sweetened beverage. It is a little bit different. It's a little bit better for you. The recommended intake is no more than 4 ounces in a day, which is not a lot. So Dr. Paxton and I both feel that for a couple of reasons, it can be difficult to try to include juice in your diet. The first is just that it's really easy to overconsume. Imagine how easy it is to drink 8 ounces, let alone just keeping it to 4. And so it's really hard to keep it within that recommended intake. And then the second reason is just that when we drink our juice, instead of eating it in fruit, we miss out on some of the benefits of eating fruit, which is fiber and other things like that we'll talk about later. And so it is okay in moderation, but I almost say if you can, choose the fruit. Another question that we both get a lot is about diet drinks or sugar-sweetened beverages. So Dr. Paxton is the expert on that.
Oh, I wish. So for this, I just kind of want to use a good, better, best principle. So it's good to drink diet drinks instead of the fully leaded versions. So clearly, with as much sugar as regular soda contains, there's no question that it's better to go with the diet or 0-calorie sodas if you're going to drink soda or other sugar beverages. It's better to drink those only at meal times, because the concern is that if we drink something that's really sweet, even if it doesn't have any calories, our brain, when it senses that we're eating something sweet, is preparing for sugar, so it's going to start that insulin response. And so even if the sugar isn't there, it will increase the insulin, which inevitably leads to weight gain. Now, the effect isn't nearly as great as for the regular sodas and sugar-sweetened beverages, because the sugar itself is a much bigger trigger of the insulin. But still, there is that mental insulin response just for the sweet taste. But if you drink that, for instance, a diet drink with the meal, you're already consuming those calories. That might be a better time to do it. Sipping on it throughout the day, maybe not as good, because you're triggering that insulin response routinely. It might be best, though, to just make milk and water your go-to drinks, especially for youth. Now, many adults can't really tolerate milk anymore, and that's totally okay. In some cultures, well over a third of people become lactose intolerant in adult years. So maybe not so much milk, but water is really, it should be the go-to beverage. But for most young people, milk and water should be our daily drinks. Also, this is over here about sugar, aspartame, stevia, saccharin. So Lisie brought up the point that these artificial sweeteners are several times sweeter than sugar. So saccharin, for instance, is 700 times sweeter than sugar. And there is a thought out there, and there's some evidence for this, that the more of these artificial sweeteners we consume, the less we're satisfied with the sweetness of just regular sugar, which kind of makes sense.
Yeah, No, perfect. And even natural sugars that we find like in fruits and vegetables, speaking of.
Mhm.
Okay, so the second principle is just to eat vegetables and fruits in abundance. And I think there's parts of this, again, that are pretty obvious. We've all probably heard many times that vegetables and fruits are filled with nutrients that are really beneficial to our health. We know that it can help in preventing disease, in getting us the nutrients that we need, and also there's a lot of studies that show that areas of the world that have the longest lifespans eat plenty.
So I put this here. This is your brain on sugar. One of the only things that has actually been strongly correlated with risk of Alzheimer's, and this has actually been over the last year that this has really come to the fore. There are many ongoing studies, but one of the only things that has been consistently shown to be connected with Alzheimer's risk is sugar intake. And I mean, we've known for years that sugars and ketones and everything have a lot to do with our brain chemistry and brain function. One of the original uses of the ketogenic diet was for some children who have intractable seizures. They would be placed on the ketogenic diet and their seizures would either decrease or sometimes resolve. So we know that there's this connection between our metabolism, endocrine system, and brain function. And it's just coming out more and more how maybe our intake of simple sugars might have an impact on our brain long term. So insulin, there's a lot now, and I don't know if anybody's heard what, like Dr. Benjamin Bickman at BYU, he's a huge researcher in this area of insulin response and the whole endocrine theory of metabolism. And there are a lot of great YouTube videos that he has out that explain his research. He's got a lot of great data on rats. He's in the human studies right now, and this data is really quite impressive with regard to how much our insulin dictates our weight, our overall health. It's really quite amazing. And then not all carbs are created equal. So the glycemic index, for those of you who may or may not be familiar with this, the idea is that you can assign a number to each food as to how much it affects your insulin levels. And so certain foods, like if you look at white bread or a white bagel, those have really high scores, 100 to 103. That means that they cause your insulin to spike really high when you eat those. And if you look in the vegetable column, many of those are 15. That means it has very little effect on your insulin at all. So as we're making choices with regards to foods, even within these categories, there are probably better choices that we can make when we keep in mind the glycemic index. All right, so fats are not the enemy. If you notice that map that we showed you, that started in 1985. That's exactly when the fat-free and low-fat craze started. And it's not just a coincidence. There's almost no question now that the fat-free and low-fat craze of the 80s and 90s really was a huge disservice to us because most of those calories were replaced with sugar, and we're seeing the results. So basically, the effect of fats when we eat dietary fat on insulin is nothing. It doesn't cause your insulin to secrete at all. And that is really important, actually. It also increases our feelings of satiety, so we tend to eat less, or we just feel full a little faster. Our bodies aren't built to absorb all the fat we can eat. They are built to absorb all the sugar we eat. So every gram of sugar you consume, your body's super good at absorbing that, and it will end up in your body. But fats, if we eat a lot, not all of that is going to be absorbed. So we do have a little bit of a mechanism for controlling our fat intake. We shouldn't go crazy about it. And there are certain fats that we should avoid. So trans fats for sure. That's well-established science that we should not eat a lot of trans fats. And unsaturated fats are thought to be better than saturated fats. However, there is some recent research that shows even the saturated fats may not be quite as bad as we once thought. So more to come on that we're going to be hearing a lot more about that. But just, I think we have to change that mindset that I know I grew up with, that fats are really bad. You've got to look for the fat-free alternative of everything. It's really not the case.
Be aware of how you celebrate and reward with food. So this is more of a behavioral element. But we just wanted to give, first, before I even go into this, I want to just make sure that we emphasize that this says be aware and not beware, right? Because in moderation, all foods are fine. And we don't want to ever classify foods as bad or eliminate them, because that will usually end up resulting in binging and will be less successful in the end. So just know, this says to be aware, be conscious of it, but don't have to worry about beware, So this first thing is to just reward yourself or your kids, if you have kids still at home, with experiences instead of foods. And especially junk food, especially treats and things like that. There's a lot of psychology when it comes to how we eat. And when we set up triggers for ourselves and feel that we deserve food after certain things, or we start associating all things with junk food, it can become a little bit tricky. Along those same lines, we encourage, especially parents, but even doing this with yourself, to never give junk food as a reward for eating healthy food. I know this is the common thing that you'll hear, eat those vegetables to get dessert. But it turns out that that's actually a lot more damaging than it is helpful. We are way less likely to end up eating those healthy foods that we're bribed to eat later on if we feel that we should only eat those in the case that there's some type of reward, right? Instead, we want to tell ourselves and teach our kids some of the benefits and the great things about those foods, which have their role in helping our body. Okay, the next thing, I say this treading lightly, because I'll just tell you straight that my family, we're big food people. We love treats. But this is saying create traditions that aren't centered on low nutrient, high calorie food. And this doesn't have to mean every single tradition. One thing that I find really interesting is a lot of times in meeting with people individually, they'll be so frustrated about not seeing results. Maybe their doctor told them that they need to lose weight, and they know that it's really important, and they say, I'm trying, I'm doing all these good things, but what's holding them back is that they have weekly and monthly traditions that are constantly repeating, that revolve around really high energy food that really doesn't do anything for them. So when I say this, what I mean is just kind of this pattern of, well, Sunday night we always have dessert, and Monday night we always have a treat with our family activity, and Wednesday, someone brings donuts to the office, and Friday, it's the weekend, so I'm going to have a treat, and then Saturday, if we go to a movie, of course we're going to have, do you know what I'm saying? And so that pattern can kind of become detrimental, and it's not that we can't have any of those things, because we absolutely can. But in order to be able to really enjoy and savor those foods when we do kind of splurge on one of those treats, I don't even want to say splurge, but enjoy one of these higher calorie, lower nutrient foods, is to be a little bit more choosy about it, and to maybe just increase our awareness about how often we're saying yes to those things so that we can have a healthier life. And then finally, this is just saying to prepare ahead for events where you might imagine that this would be a problem. So, for example, those donuts at the office, maybe you're always reaching for those because you don't have a healthier option. So making sure to come prepared so that you're not starving. None of us make good decisions when we're hungry, and we're way less likely to choose to eat healthy or stick to our health goals.
So we'll go through this one pretty quickly. Again, it doesn't have to do with nutrition, but there's a lot that revolves around our general health, and especially with regard to physical activity. So the health benefits of exercise, there have been studies that show that daily exercise is often equivalent to like serotonin medications and other antidepressants for those who are suffering from depression. Our mental health often is so influenced and so impacted by that physical activity. If we could get that daily, that's going to really help us. We feel more energetic actually when we expend energy. There are less risk of chronic diseases. Certainly it improves cognitive function. That's been shown in study after study. Students who exercise regularly perform better on standardized tests. And we also tend to have better sleep when we exercise daily. One thing about exercise that I do find really important, and I think this is true for both men and women, boys and girls, we should incorporate some sort of resistance training, strength training in our exercise, just so we can maintain that muscle mass. And if we're doing that, we shouldn't pay a lot of attention to the scale, at least not little changes, because it might be that if we've incorporated a new strength training program into our exercise, the number on the scale might not change, or it might actually increase a little bit if you add some muscle. But you'll notice if you're looking at the right things, you'll feel better and your clothes will fit better. So the number on the scale maybe isn't as important if we're increasing our strength and our muscle mass. So that is an important part of our daily physical activity as well.
Great. Okay, so next we just wanted to talk about eating mindfully. And there's a couple of things here. I think when it comes to eating mindfully, this is such a personal thing. It's behavioral, and so it's hard to give exact tips on. But basically what you want to do is to get to the point that instead of abiding by rules that you've been told or that you've given yourself, to just become more aware and more mindful about your choices. So if you find yourself reaching for something, especially if it's maybe not the healthiest option, ask yourself, am I bored? Am I stressed? Am I lonely or sad? Am I thirsty? We have a hard time differentiating between hunger and thirst. So maybe take a minute to think, have I been drinking today? Also, another one is, am I looking at a screen? And the reason we say this is because it's so easy to eat mindlessly when we're watching TV or scrolling our phone. And I know I've had this experience, but have you ever been watching TV with your bowl of popcorn, and then all of a sudden you're reaching and, oh, it's gone. I feel like that's a perfect example of the fact that we can be so mindless as we're eating, And so just becoming more present as you eat will help you to feel more satisfied and better regulate your portion control. One principle that's really important is this return to the family table. And that, again, has to do with being more present in our meal. There's so many studies that show benefits, not just socially and psychologically, but also physically. We're more willing to try new things. We have a better regulation of our appetite. If our parents are giving us a good example, that does amazing things. And also, if we're taking time to sit at the table, we probably took time to put a little bit of preparation into our food. And it's hard to eat a lot of vegetables and things like that with zero prep. And I have learned that the hard way. My husband's like, oh, really? But no. So the other thing that we wanted to address really briefly with eating mindfully, we talked about being a little bit weary of these rules that we've given ourselves or that society has given us, And one of the things that I get a ton of questions about has to do with how often people eat or when they're eating. So people will say, I've heard that I should eat a lot of times throughout the day to rev up my metabolism. And we know now, with a lot of research to back it up, that the amount of times that we eat in a day doesn't influence our metabolism. And so instead you want to just be more mindful and honor your cues of hunger, honor cues of being full, and also prepare. If you're someone who gets ravenously hungry by dinner, then it may be beneficial to include a snack in between to prevent that. But you wouldn't be doing that to boost your metabolism.
Fast food is often a part of many people's lives, hopefully not on a daily basis, but yeah, it's definitely out there, and I think it's increasing. But almost every fast food place actually does have some healthy choices. So as you scrutinize the menu, you can actually determine that, again, almost everywhere, there's well, I won't get into that, but
He's like,
almost
don't quote
everywhere
me.
you can find some pretty healthy choices. The nutritional information, at least for the large chain restaurants, has to be published on their website and on their menus, and so you can actually see how many calories are in each menu item, and that's an important way to keep track of it as well. Everybody says, yeah, just eat a salad, you'll stay healthy. Well, a Cafe Rio salad, depending on what you have on it, that can be 1,200 calories. So you've got to be a little careful with that too. The kids menu, so there's a lot of, I read a report that said that in the 50s and 60s, the average serving size at restaurants was the size of the kids menus today. So if we were to order from the kids menu, which I do all the time. That, I think, is just one step in the right direction with regard to fast food. And then some of the chains are actually presenting us with a little bit better choices. So for the kids meal, just to bring up McDonald's, you can actually have apple slices instead of French fries, right? And you can have milk instead of a soda. So we can make healthy choices even with fast food. You are what you drink. Those huge beverages, those are like a dessert. So if you're going to drink it, that's your dessert. But just realize that is going to increase your calorie intake exponentially. Like Lisie said, we don't tend to feel full when we consume that kind of calorie. And so we should be careful with those large drinks. And then food fast versus fast food. So I was just thinking when we're in St. George and we're going to go eat somewhere, if we're ever close to Harmon's, Natalie wants to run into Harmon's because she knows they have a great salad bar. And I happen to know of even a gas station convenience store that has a pretty good salad bar in Spanish Fork. So you can actually find some pretty healthy choices, and you can get them fast. And it's maybe not the fast food we think of, but sometimes when you don't have a lot of time, you can still think creatively and make some healthier choices. So I'll go through this really fast, but eat like the French. So take your time. The French are notorious for having 4-hour meals at dinner. And that's great. I don't know if I could do that. But what we find is that if we do take our time and we're talking as we're eating, we're less likely to eat past full when we eat more slowly. And also a lot more is going on than just eating when we're having our meals and taking our time. Enjoy it. I mean, savor the food. Enjoy what you're doing. Enjoy that moment. The French are also well known for really loving their food, and they enjoy it, and they're not afraid of any foods. But the last part, oh, sorry, I skipped past it. But so portion control, they eat just a proper portion of each thing too. You know, they enjoy that. They don't overeat, and overall, they tend to control their weight really well, and they're quite healthy. So that was kind of in jest, but some of those ideas are definitely valid.
Practicing self-monitoring, and we put this here just because we don't want it to come across that because we're saying, avoid dieting or don't go on a diet, that we're saying just do all of this intuitively. I know that I had a professor in college who always said it'd be intuitive, and I was like, this is not intuitive for me, and so it's okay to give yourself a little bit of regulation or a way to practice and some ideas for doing that. For some, it may be beneficial to track food intake for a short time. We can learn a lot from ourselves and from our own data. So not making this a forever thing or being too harsh on ourselves, but using it as an opportunity to learn from yourself and maybe make a couple replacements that you wouldn't have thought to make before. Another thing is to monitor progress. Maybe you have a goal to drink more water, eat more fruits and vegetables, or exercise 5 times a week or something. Monitor your progress with a little chart or an app. I know for some that doesn't work. I work with some people who get really discouraged when they say, I was going to do this every day, and look, here I am with 2 check marks. One thing that I would encourage you to do if that's maybe the category that you fit into, and I would kind of raise my hand there, is to maybe keep a journal and write a couple little lines at the end of the night that says, here's what I succeeded with my goal today, or maybe here's where I went wrong, and then brainstorm to yourself, how can I learn from this and prepare for tomorrow? Maybe I pack a lunch, maybe I, bring my exercise clothes with me, or whatever it is so that you can be more successful the next time. And then finally, there's actually a lot of research behind finding an accountability buddy, and having someone that you can be accountable to really can help. So just in closing, we wanted to say our main takeaway, if we could pick one, would be that we can all make meaningful improvements to our diet without dieting. And that's really what we want you to say. It's not that it doesn't matter. It's not that weight doesn't matter, or that, health can just come naturally, but it's that there are healthier ways that we can go about this without restricting ourselves. And I wholeheartedly believe that, and I know that Dr. Paxton does as well.
So, sorry we went kind of over. If there are any questions, we'll just have like 1 minute. But I just wanted to say, I'm so excited that we're able to start this wellness program at the clinic. This is for families, and the reason I'm so excited about it is because Lisie can spend time with people that I can't spend, and she's going to instruct families on an ongoing basis. We have some cards on the table back there that explain a lot more about the wellness program, and so feel free to pick those up. They are for families with a focus on children at home, but really the whole family will benefit from this instruction. So let anybody know that you think might benefit from this wellness program, that we're getting it started, and we're really excited to have it going. Obviously, Lisie knows her stuff, and she's really going to help a lot of people through this. Also, just a plug for the next one, Dr. Bennett back here is going to present in a couple of weeks on increasing your child's success in school. So that's on February 1st. That's our next seminar. So, any questions? Oh, Casey just reminded me, those water bottles are for you guys, so feel free to take one on your way out, and then the papers are on there as well.
On the obesity map,
Yeah.
where we went from 85 to 2010, are other countries going through the same thing, or do we have
Not
do we have the blue ribbon
really.
on that?
Some are to a certain extent, but not nearly to the extent of ours. And it's a little unclear, especially, so in Europe, there are little trends in that direction, but the percentages are all much, much lower.
I mean, obviously, third world countries probably aren't going to go through that because
Sure.
of poverty and everything else. But Canada, or,
I haven't seen the Canadian numbers. That's actually a good point. I'm not sure about Canada. That would be interesting because that might be similar. It probably is, in fact. Oh, I'm so glad you brought that up. So if you go to the store now, last year the FDA said those are no longer allowed to be called milk. So it says almond non-dairy beverage. It's really not milk. So the concern was that some people were actually substituting almond milk for like 1-year-old children that they didn't want to give cow's milk to, and it's no substitute. Unfortunately, the nutritional value it just pales in comparison to cow's milk, especially for 1 to 2-year-olds. But even children in general, I usually recommend pretty high milk intake. I think it's a very healthy food for them. So lactate is reasonable. That's about. I mean, you can still consume milk with the lactate, and it's just a matter of amounts. So most people who are lactose intolerant can tolerate up to a certain amount, and they kind of know where that is, and they just stay below. So they can still consume it, just maybe not as much. So Crystal Light, that has like somewhere around 0 or 10 calories or something really small, right?
I know that it's sweetened with aspartame.
Yeah.
So it's anything he said about sugar-sweetened beverages.
Yeah, it still applies, but it's good in the sense that it would be like a diet drink. It would be in the same category because it delivers almost no calories, but your brain still senses sweet, so it's still going to bump your insulin, which is a little bit of a concern.
Is there any research behind the DNA testing to tell us what will help us lose weight? Like I saw Helix, they send you DNA and it tells you what will help you lose your weight. Is that just another gimmick for now?
So I'm not familiar with that one in particular, but right now, anybody who's saying, send us your blood and $500 and we'll send you some information, you have to be a little weird. Yeah, or 1,000 or whatever. I mean, I'm not talking about the ancestry stuff. That's actually valid. But those things, I don't think we're quite there yet. At least not for general practice. I know a ton of studies are ongoing, but the fact is, nutrition and weight in general, there are so many individual factors that one genetic test could never tell us all that we need to know. That's for sure.
So does your wellness program take into account individual hormones and do adults as well as children?
Yeah, it can. What's great about the wellness program is that I work in conjunction with your doctor, And so that's helpful because all that medical information is available. So if there's a reason to have that information, then we would have that information, which is really helpful. I think when it comes to genetics, it's a little bit tricky because when it comes to our weight, at least what we know from the research now is that it makes a lot less of a contribution to our weight than what we perceive. More than anything, it's the behaviors that we get from our parents and that we learn, from our culture. And so that's a lot of the emphasis, but there definitely is hormonal components, and we'll definitely take that into consideration, yes.
Could you help us identify when we're getting a good fat versus a bad fat?
So since that's in so much flux right now, I would say the only thing we know for sure is that the trans fats are not good and that we should generally trend towards the unsaturated fats. But like, for instance, the milk fat is thought to be fairly good. And so fats that we find in dairy products generally felt to be quite healthy. But again, this is a huge ongoing area of research. In fact, Professor Bickman's work, he works a lot with this. And so I think we're going to see a lot more in the upcoming years. Probably see different dietary guidelines too with regard to this. So stay tuned. The jury is still out.
You said there were YouTube videos of his, I guess.
Yeah, so
What's his name?
so Benjamin Bickman, yeah. And yeah, he's huge in the field right now. And granted, he is a giant proponent of the high-fat, low-carb diet, which, I mean, is a diet, so we have to take that into account. But he has some excellent research, and he basically works so much on this this metabolic, or rather endocrine, model of metabolism that he feels that takes basically into account the calorie model, which we've always operated on. Just your calories totally determine your weight. It's probably not entirely. In fact, it's clearly not entirely true. And so yeah, he had a BYU forum actually in the summer. It was in July. It was called The Plagues of Prosperity, where he goes over a lot of this. And but he also has other YouTube videos that just go over his research, and he's been asked to speak at multiple places.
Just a comment I ran into after the last meeting was there's a lot of blue zone information on YouTube also. Just tons of it. We touched on blue zone last meeting. Pretty exciting stuff.
So
Good.
with Blue Zone, you're referring to the areas of the world where they have a really long period of life. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that is really interesting stuff.
So a lot of the Scandinavian countries, and then also Japan is an interesting one in that regard.
Loma Linda, California.
Seventh-day Adventist.
Exactly. Plant-based food.
Yeah. All right. I think we've got to clear the room, right, Casey? All right.
We can come to you personally to answer your question.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.